Hello and welcome back. This is the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. This is Penny Sansevieri and Amy Cornell. And if you hear some laughter in the background, it's because I every time I get on the show, like we're all ready, we've got our notes, we have everything ready to go. And then I'm like, oh, I forgot the name of our show.
Oh my gosh. It's so funny. If we ever release a bloopers reel, we will have to put a content warning like, this is not for children. Please put on their earmuffs. This is R-rated.
I don't know what's going on. It's just the funniest thing. But listen, we are so excited because we have our very first Can This Book Be Saved? And I got to tell you, I got an email from this author, Isabel Peterson. Love that name, by the way. And she wrote this, which I just thought was just unbelievably darling, her email about, what's happening for her and what's going on. And I think as a first one, it's a great example for some other authors out there that maybe are dealing with the same things. I think a lot of us are dealing with the same things. So on this show today, we are talking about how not to look like a book marketing amateur, which I know sounds negative, right? But that's not the intention of the show, is it, Amy?
No, not at all. We have very good intentions for helping you not look like an amateur.
Right, exactly. And I think that, I'm particularly really excited about this because I think that it's kind of like, it's sort of like those travel guides, right? That say, listen, here's how to travel to wherever you're going, Spain, Italy, whatever, and not to look like a tourist, right? So you get, right, here's some tips to avoid. This is kind of the same thing. This is sort of like a travel guide in a way.
Perfect. I like that.
You're publishing. And because most of our shows talk about what we should do, and we don't really spend a lot of time discussing what you should not do. So before I have Amy kick this off, I want to just remind y'all that we love reviews. I know I beg for reviews every single show. It's getting old. It's not old for me. And I'll stop after y'all have listened to, after y'all have all reviewed the show, then I'll stop asking for reviews. Speaking of reviews,
Amy, that's fair.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe we're kicking it off with this first one, but just go ahead.
Okay.
Why don't you start? What's the first one?
The first thing you can do to look like an amateur while marketing your book is asking for 5-star reviews.
Right. And I just want to add a caveat. I didn't ask for a 5-star review. So I just said, I'm backpedaling here like crazy. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you. Go for it.
Yes, you are within the guidelines, Penny. No, and I feel like a lot of authors listening will fall easily into one of two categories. One is thinking like, of course you can't do that. No way. And then the other is thinking that we're trying to tamper their efforts, which both, like, there's something right in the middle there. But the reality is you can't ask for 5-star reviews, and you really shouldn't even ask for good reviews. Mm-hmm. It's not professional. And people just kind of shy away from that in general. It just leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And, plus you learn nothing from lip service at any point in your author career, during development of your book. Yeah. You don't want an editor that's just like, oh, everything's wonderful. Find a new editor. You know what I mean? Like, so at any point in your career, if all you're getting is lip service from people, they don't have your best intentions at heart. So rethink that. And so we encourage you to ask for thoughtful, constructive reviews. And honestly, that's what we look for with the podcast. We've had some really constructive reviews that have been really helpful. And those constructive reviews that are thoughtful and genuine and not always just perfectly glowing, are what actually convince other people to buy because they sound real. So if somebody genuinely enjoyed your book, that comes across. People that are asked to give them a great, like, oh, you need to give me a really good review. It'll help me out. I tell you, people will see right through that.
Yeah.
It's usually really obvious. So, constructive reviews will also help you become a better author. And while we're on this, please don't rate and review your own book. Like, we see too many people rating and reviewing their own books on Goodreads, especially. And we work with authors. We work with authors that on Goodreads, strategies. So when we're in there, I'm like, oh, look at all these great, when I go through the accounts and I look into them and I'm checking all their things and I'm like, oh, this was a really great review. And then I'm like, oh my God, no, that was from the author. Like that,
Right.
that needs to go away now. So if any of you are sitting there and blushing a little bit, you fix that as soon as you're done listening to this show. Okay.
That's fabulous. But it is very true. And, sometimes we've had situations where even under the editorial reviews where we've caught authors writing fake editorial reviews. We understand it's hard to get reviews, like we get it, but this is not a case where you want to fake it till you make it. I mean, this is not, you really don't want to do.
No, that's a really great way to put it, Penny, because truly it is more transparent than it seems. Nobody's that good at being sneaky. So.
Right. Exactly. So the other thing not to do or make you look like an amateur is asking for an NDA. If you're not familiar with an NDA, it's a non-disclosure, prevents me from talking about the book or whatever. And I think that a lot of authors do that because they're worried that somebody's going to steal their work. I can honestly say that, and I think actually Jane Friedman commented on this on her blog too, that NDAs just really are I just kind of sigh when somebody asks me to sign NDAs. Like, well, and I have no trouble signing them, but I've yet in my almost 21 years in business, I've yet to see anybody get their book stolen. Like I've never heard that somebody got their book stolen. Now, I will say that, if you foreign rights and sometimes your book winds up in another country, that's a whole different subject. And that's after the book's published. So an NDA would have protected you from that. But I've literally never heard anybody getting their books signed. I've never had, even for really, really, really high profile books that we've worked on and authors and stuff that I've never signed an NDA. So just don't do it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Penny. And if people are going like, well, why? Still just why? Like if maybe it just doesn't hurt. But the point is that, it shouldn't, what we're really concerned with is that it's going to prevent you. You're using that as a filter to determine who you collaborate with, and it's a terrible filter to use to determine who your best team is, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So by not working with somebody because they scoff at the NDA or you know what I mean? So it's just a barrier that you're setting up and a hurdle that you're creating for yourself in potentially finding the best people to help support your book, if that makes sense. So again, Penny was very honest. She doesn't mind signing them, but it's just one of those things that it's a weird elephant in the room that kind of sets the tone for the working relationship that is not in the best interest of your book.
Right, exactly. Because the NDAs then have to be, you have to think about too, if you're going to then work with that company, I can't work on a book that I have an NDA for because technically I'm not allowed to talk about the book.
So they're really counterproductive.
Right. So it's counterproductive. So, if you still feel strongly about an NDA, remember that you have to then cancel or create I'm not a legal person, so I'm going to just use terminology that's not really legalese, but you're going to have to cancel that NDA or find some other way to nullify it because you cannot promote a book if you have signed an NDA. And I think the other piece of this too that I want to say is that if you're speaking to a publicity firm, you should trust, you should have done your homework enough. It's important that you talk to people or that you consider the person that you're hiring, that you trust them. So I'm like a therapist or a doctor or whatever. I don't, other than maybe brainstorming it, the book with Amy, I don't talk about it. I don't share it on my social media. Like that conversation that I have with that author is confidential just by nature of it's their time with me. And I don't share that with anybody. So I think you have to, and I'm not going to, I'm not interesting enough to hack necessarily, but I'm also not going to take their book and send it out to all my friends and go, hey, you should read this. This is really great. I would be more likely to send the Amazon link and say, hey, you should buy this book because this book is really great. So I think it's also the trust factor. You should trust the people that you're speaking to, because otherwise your relationship is really not going to be very good if you decide to hire them.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right.
Next up,
sending emails or pitches without checking spelling and grammar. Oh my goodness. Okay. So everything matters. We say this all the time. Your professionalism matters. Check all emails with your name on it for spelling, grammar, accuracy. Recheck if you have a conversation going with people, check what you've discussed before, be accurate. And then also tone, because, you can't unring a bell. And I can tell you very honestly that we've opted not to work with a handful of authors over the years because of how they conducted themselves in email.
Oh, yeah.
Very truly.
Yeah.
And this goes for just sloppy emails, because honestly, if you're sending sloppy emails, we don't trust that your work product will be any different.
Uh-huh.
We are not editors. We are promoters. So we really expect you to bring your best to the table. So that's something that, we are not here to baby you and to mommy you. You need to bring your best to the table. And if you're sending sloppy emails, we're going to assume your book is sloppy as well.
Right.
And if your tone isn't professional, we simply don't want to spend our time trying to support someone who is negative. Right. There's only so many hours in a day. We are a relatively small team in the big scheme of things. There are only so many authors we can help at one time. So, damn straight, we are going to spend our time with people that are positive, that are pleasant to work with, that have enthusiasm for their work. You know what I mean? All those great things that everybody is drawn to. So bringing negativity to the table is something also I think you need to be really aware of in your tone in email, and reviewing what you send, because if it has your name on it, that's how people will view you.
Right. And and it's very easy, I think, especially when you're pitching yourself, that you kind of point and click, these emails and send these out to bloggers and things like that. But what Amy said about how we evaluate people who contact us, bloggers and media are the same way. So if you're sending something, nobody's perfect, we get it, but you got to be really careful, because absolutely everything is your resume. So, when, the old saying, people, don't judge a book by its cover. In an electronic world, we do judge, people, media, bloggers, folks that you're trying to get in touch with, to absolutely do judge by your correspondence and things like that. So I think that is really, really, really important. Okay, so next up is your look, your theme, your brand. And I'm just going to say this again. I kind of reuse this phrase a lot, and I apologize for that, but I can't emphasize it enough. Absolutely everything is your resume. What happens when you and this isn't about spending a lot of money. And part of the reason that I'm so excited about this author that we're doing this, How This Book Can Be Saved, is because this is somebody who really did it all right. Her branding just looks really, really good. It needs to look uniform, because what happens is that, and again, it's not about spending a whole lot of money, but when even the font on your book cover and the font on your website and kind of the overall look of the message that you're putting out into the universe, right, about your book, it should all sync up. When you land, if you're, let's just use the media as an example. Okay. So if you're pitching yourself to the media and you were to come to me and say, Penny, I'm not having a lot of luck pitching bloggers or pitching media. What's the problem? And if I go to your website and then I go to your book, and your website looks kind of like a mishmash of a lot of, which I realize is easy. Especially for those of you who are doing your own websites, it's easy to get to cobble stuff together. I get it. But it's your resume, right? It all has to look clean and professional. And because just like sending an email with a bunch of typos in it, or, some typos in it even, I'm going to then assume, and maybe that's a wrong assumption, but still, this is the assumption that's going to happen, is that everything that your book is also kind of a mess or a mishmash. So the more that you can look, the more that you can present this consistency, the better you will find that a lot of your marketing will fall in line because everything looks uniform. And again, this isn't about spending $10,000 on a website. It's just making sure that you understand how you want to show up in the world. So,
yeah.
And
that entirely, and keeping it updated. I know that's slightly different, but it does reflect on your brand when things aren't updated. I see that a lot, Penny, and it bums me out. When I go to somebody's website, like if they contacted us this week and they have it featured on their website, essentially like my new book coming out in January 2021. It's like, okay. Like, do you visit your own website? Like,
oh yeah, yeah, we should do a separate website one because that's a big one too, is that not, paying attention, because I think that, it's easy to get into it's easy to just kind of fall into the track of, it's good enough, but that becomes that's a big red flag. And that's, one of the easiest ways actually to sabotage your own success. And it's hard. Like, I get it. It's not easy. I'm in the middle of picking my cover from book to bestseller. And I'll tell you something, I would actually rather, with all due respect to cats, I would probably rather wash a cat right now. Mm-hmm. It's really hard. Like, I get it. I agonize over it. I'm like, oh, but it's what we do. Amy, do you want to take the next one?
Yes. So our next one, marketing a book like an amateur. One big red flag is that you don't know how to access your Amazon accounts. And listen, I'm going to be really frank with this one. There is a huge difference between not knowing something and being unwilling to learn something.
Right.
So I want to make that very clear. So I'm not slamming people that don't know all the ins and outs of Amazon, because honestly, there are days where Penny and I are like, well, apparently we know nothing, because Amazon will change something and we get, you know what I mean? And it's all of a sudden we're like, okay, well, that's wildly different now. And we need to start learning something new again. So there is a huge difference between not knowing and being unwilling to learn. So let me say that first. And honestly, the vast majority of authors we work with know very little about how to publish a book. That's just the reality, or the ins and outs of Amazon. And many of them go on to have really successful careers because they're willing to learn and figure things out along the way.
Yeah.
Even when it gets frustrating. And we know it gets frustrating because we get frustrated too. But a small minority of authors end up revealing that they're unwilling to learn, authors that we work with. And it's just such an unfortunate situation to get into, because at the end of the day, it's really expensive to be unwilling to problem solve. You know what I mean? Like, if you're unwilling to learn or to problem solve, then you better be willing to hire that out, because nobody will learn for you for free.
Right.
And not everyone is willing to put a price tag on it. We have a small team. I've mentioned that. We love promoting books. And Penny, you are always really generous with the amount of educational content you put out there. But we expect our clients to learn. Sorry, can you hear the production team right now?
I can hear the production. I love it. Is that Bernie or Frankie?
It's probably both. I think they're in concert.
That's awesome.
Anyway, learn how to access your Amazon accounts. Be willing to learn how to make the most of everything available to you, especially if you're investing in a collaboration with a team. It's just know going into it that that's part of the deal of being an author, is learning things you don't know.
Well, but the other thing though, too, Amy, is that, and I totally agree with you, but the other reason that I really want authors to empower themselves to learn this is because you don't want anybody pulling the wool over your eyes, or even, and by anybody, I mean Amazon, sorry. I just have to say that you really, the more you know, isn't that like an NBC thing? The more you know, the more empowered you will be. So this is really about empowering you to learn. And I know that it's not easy. Believe me, I get it. As Amy said, sometimes Amazon changes stuff and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to learn over again. But it is important. And it's helpful for you to be empowered with that knowledge, to be able to go in there and make your own changes or do, whatever.
Absolutely. And, I think a lot of authors forget that in the moment we'll say, okay, get in your account. Here's how you do it. And immediately they get overwhelmed. But, we're not going to be together forever.
Right. Right.
So that's another thing too. So unless this is your only book you ever plan on publishing, or you just have unlimited income to consistently pay people to do things for you, which in both of those things are typically not the case, with most authors, you have to learn it eventually. And so why not put in the time and effort when you're collaborating with a team and you've invested in some promotion, and now you can take an active role in supporting that.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. So the next one is not having done your market research, or, not really knowing your reader, because, it's interesting how often I hear from authors that they don't know who their reader market is, or they don't really read in their genre, or they don't know their genre at all. And that's a little scary. And I think that, it's a little bit like, I don't know, opening up a coffee shop and not really knowing anything about coffee. Like nobody would ever do that. Yet so many times authors jump headlong into book publishing without having any kind of a clue about who their market is. And I think part of that comes from the idea. So you get this jolt of an idea and you kind of fill in the rest after. And I understand that because I've done, I've gotten ideas for books where I think, oh my gosh, this is going to be great, only to realize later that, the genesis of the idea, the original idea was not really good on its own, but it can be morphed into something else. So I think that save yourself a lot of money, do some due diligence, save yourself a lot of time and money, make sure that you understand what your reader market needs, because that is the first step to selling books. And as a marketing company, if you have not written a book that is right for your market or that has no readers for it, like there's literally nothing I can do. Like not a magic. I'm not a magic person at all. So you absolutely have to make sure and know who your reader market is. So Amy, you want to take the next one?
Yes. So the next one is highlighting things you're not proud of. This is kind of an amateur move, but it's also one of those things we know happens a lot because you're working really hard to just cover all your bases a lot of times, and then you're like, okay, I'm exhausted and I can't. But, again, everything matters. Everything is your resume. So an example, you wouldn't put a job on your resume if you only showed up for a couple of days and then quit, right? I mean, right, I hope the answer would be no, I would obviously not do that. So that's the marketing and branding equivalent, in my opinion, of creating social media accounts, across the board, and then slapping those links up on your website and then never using them, or starting a blog and posting a few times and then just leaving it to languish for a year.
Yeah.
So don't highlight things you're not proud of. If you can't commit to your blog, pull it off your website. It's actually really easy to hide pages, even on basic website structure. So hide it. You don't have to lose all the work, but pull it off of there until you're ready to get back to it consistently. And then the reality is most authors shouldn't be on every single social media platform. Very few authors have such a diverse demographic that not being everywhere would hurt their book. So pick one or two that really make sense for who your reader demographic is and where they're most likely to be hanging out. Spend time there and put those links on your website. So again, just highlight things that you're doing really well and things that you're proud of, and be critical and conscientious enough to pull things off that you're not.
Yeah, I think that's very smart. And the next one on our list is having no clue how much marketing costs in both time and effort. I think that one of the biggest challenges that authors often face is getting into this quite a bit unprepared. It's sort of like showing up at a car dealership with $500 and, being surprised that you won't drive off with a new car, which I realize is sort of an obvious analogy. But I think that, understanding what costs are before you get into marketing. I belong to this Facebook author group, and most of the posts are really great. Some of them are kind of head scratchers. Like, for example, there was an author who asked what they can get for $50 in terms of marketing. And I think, don't get me wrong, like there are a lot of authors who bootstrap their campaigns and do really well. But I think that if you're shopping for your marketing and you only have $50 to spend, is that, what does your book cover budget look like? So, because usually, as a person does one thing, they do all things generally. So I think that if you have, maybe you spent all your money on your book cover and that's all you have left, in which case planning your expenses for your book is as important as, planning for your book.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Like I like your point that you need to be realistic about what's out there.
Yeah.
And yes, and when you don't know, you don't know. So you do a little shopping around.
Right.
But, and I think this also goes back to, where we talk about the learning curve and being willing to learn and put some time in to kind of fill in those holes if your budget can't,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And also you don't, the other reason that you want to do this is you don't want to run out of, you want to know how to spend your money wisely, I think. So it's not just about let's pick on the guy with the $50 budget. That's not that at all. It's just, make sure that you know where you need to be spending your money. I think that's important too. Absolutely.
That's very smart. And we try to be realistic and help authors in that regard, Penny, because we've said that before to people that come to us and they say, they pretty much allude to the fact that they give us a budget and they're like, this is all I have. I'm dipping into savings. And we're very honest about counseling them on those kind of decisions. Not that you shouldn't spend money to promote your book, but just being smart about it, like you said, because your book doesn't become a success with one marketing push.
Right.
It's really an ongoing thing. So you also have to keep in mind like that you will have to continue promoting this book in order for it to be a success someday. And so throwing all your money at something at the onset and keeping your fingers crossed is not a great marketing plan.
Right. Right. Exactly. So Amy, do you want to take the next one?
Yes. So, okay, this is another one, and some people may chuckle at first, but it's true. We kind of have it listed as your motivation is more fitting for therapy than a book. And maybe that sounds a little harsh, but hear me out. We did a show on memoirs, and this kind of fits in with that, meaning a memoir could be a great example of writing for therapy. But as professional marketers, we can tell you that if you wrote a book specifically because something was eating away at you, and that was your biggest intention for writing it, that was your biggest driving factor, you might end up in a field of dreams situation, but ghosts don't buy books. So meaning it's too easy to end up with a book that just had the wrong end game in sight.
True. Yeah.
And when that happens, and Penny, you've touched on this before, it's really hard to work backwards, so when that happens, it gets really difficult to come up with ways that the book can actually serve someone else when the motivation was so internalized and so focused on things that are only important to you.
Yeah.
And if we can't create those obvious selling points for other people, whether it's a memoir or any other book, it's really going to be very hard to market it. It's going to be really hard to get it to resonate with other people. So truly, like, be critical when you have a motivation for writing a book and think about how is this going to serve other people. If you really just need to get stuff off your chest, fine. Just know that this may not be a book that's a runaway success that a bunch of other people want to snag,
Well, and I think that it's a good opportunity. I think this is a good opportunity to ask, if you're, getting ready to write, if that thing has been gnawing at you and you really want to put it down on paper, ask yourself what your goals are for the book and be really realistic about that. Because the reason that we mention this is because you can save yourself a whole lot of time and effort when you're thinking about publicizing the book, because that's, if you're part of any kind of author group, or if you're on any kind of author group on Facebook, like, all right, now you have to publicize your book. Well, maybe you don't. Maybe you just wrote the book because you had something that you wanted to put on paper, because there's a lot of power in that. And we know that there's a lot of therapy around that. So I think that, just be really honest with yourself. And one example that I'm sorry, this is just so funny. I guess this was maybe 15 years ago. I talked, and this guy actually wrote a fiction book, and his motivation was for writing this. And this is sort of a direct quote. I wrote this to get back at that bitch of an ex-wife. and that made me nervous. I will tell you, and I'll tell you why that made me nervous, because he obviously had a lot of stuff going on around that ex-wife, and there's no way that any book could live up to what he was probably wrestling with. And maybe she was the B word. Now I've already said it. So now apparently we have to
know.
put explicit on this podcast now, but whatever. You know, maybe she was a difficult person, but at the same time, it's like for him to say that to me, I said, oh, you know what? Maybe this is
Right?
not, you know what I mean? And I think
Yes.
like the woman died in the book or something like
And
she
again,
was,
that's where it gets way too specific for other people to fully resonate with. You know what I mean? Like life, there's a lot that happens to us in the experience of life that connect us with each other. But when it gets real specific like that, you start losing people, you know?
Right. Exactly. And the final point that I want to mention is I think that making too many assumptions around social media, this is a big one for a lot of people. Making assumptions that your Facebook friends, Instagram, Twitter followers, your newsletter, that all your reviews and all your sales are covered. And you would be amazed, like listening, you may be shaking your head saying, oh, I would never do that. But you would be amazed how many times that we hear this, because any list that's worth having, whether it's social media or email newsletter, takes a lot of work. So even like if you have a newsletter list, you say, well, nobody's buying my book from this newsletter list, or nobody's ever responding. It's probably because you haven't invested enough work in that newsletter. And we did a newsletter show, so definitely go back and look for it. And I think the same is true for all your friends and family who say they'll buy your book. It's surprisingly common for friends and family to not buy your book. And it's not because you need new friends and family.
Yeah, that's good.
It's just because people get busy, or it's not, the kind of book that they would normally buy or whatever. And maybe they'll support you in some other way by liking your social media post or something like that.
Yes. And I had a point to say about this too. And I'm not going to name names because I don't think that's necessarily fair in this situation, but we had a very high profile celebrity a couple of years ago come to us.
Yeah.
And I love this example. And I keep this example in mind when I'm like, okay, am I doing the right thing by keeping this, this author's expectations in check? And then I think about this and I'm like, yes, I am. But anyway, we're talking international recognition, long running television show, all that stuff. And this person was savvy enough to tell us when they came to us, when they were seeking professional book marketing help, because she said she pretty much knows that her following, her social following, couldn't be expected to buy a book, buy that book. What she was famous for, her typical social followers, her brand overall was just not the same demographic as the target market for the type of book that she wrote. And she was realistic about this. This is somebody with 14 million Twitter followers and nearly 7 million Instagram followers.
Right.
And hell, she probably got a guaranteed blurb in People magazine even when the book went out. But even she knew that she needed to put the work in other ways to reach the right people.
Right.
And I just thought that was so smart and so self-aware. And if this woman knew that, then I 100% feel confident sharing that and encouraging other authors to keep that same kind of perspective in mind.
I think that's really smart. No, and you're absolutely right. And that was really funny when she said that to me on the phone. And I thought, oh my gosh, I wanted to high five her and say, oh, that is just such a smart.
Know. She said it in a way that was way funnier, but I was like, I shouldn't quote her like that. That's not fair.
No, it was really funny. So so to wrap up the show, we want to mention this Isabel Peterson who contacted us. Such a great email. She talked about her challenges, and I'm not going to read this verbatim because obviously this was an email, to me. But Isabel, if you're listening, which I hope you are, I want to tell you that I think she talked about a lot of things that I think can be really overwhelming for authors. So your newsletter, she was really upset that I don't say really upset, overwhelmed is a better word, that she hasn't segmented it. I want to say to you that first off, your brand looks so great. I love the look of your website. She said, I have comparisonitis, which I thought was just brilliant because a lot of authors deal with this. Your website looks great. I would recommend to you, especially with regards to your newsletter, is take it, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? I mean, I would say take it in chunks. If you don't know what to talk about for your newsletter, which I think a lot of authors sort of fall into this thing, pick five different tracks, for example, that you want to address, and one of those is obviously going to be your book, writing your book, maybe subscribe to some other newsletters, similar authors in your genre, and kind of see what they, what they talk about. Stop comparing yourself to other authors. And this is for everyone listening. Stop comparing yourselves. We only show the great stuff on social media. Nobody is going to, I realize sometimes people take pictures of their broken foot or whatever. But most of the time, most of us are not showing the day-to-day struggles. So stop comparing yourself, because your website, honestly, your website's great. She said, I don't even know if my website's any good. Your website's fabulous. Have you looked at some websites that are out there? And I have to tell you, I think I stumbled on your site previously because your happy hour blog post with all those boozy recipes, awesome. So I just think that I think that's really smart. And I think that your newsletter could also sort of fall into that. You could, why not share fun little boozy recipes in your newsletter, right? People are going to unsubscribe. Like somebody's just like, well, this Isabel, all she ever talks about is booze. Fine. I'm just saying, you're going to get people that are going to unsubscribe. You cannot please everybody all the time. So find your lane and put your newsletter out and start doing it once a month and just kind of see. But you've got a really good base. Amy, did you want to take one of her books quickly?
Yeah, I'm looking at her Author Central page and I see that there's a lot of great stuff happening. I will say, it comes down to, and she's made this pretty difficult, because what I was expecting was to get authors writing us and they had like maybe 2 reviews and,
right.
and maybe 1 or 2 books. So she's made it extra challenging because she's got a lot of books and a lot of her books have some really great reviews too. So then it gets down into like the little teeny tiny details that sometimes do matter when they all add up, especially when you have got lots of books going on. Mm-hmm. So while I appreciate that, on Win for Love, she's got a contemporary new adult romance. It's like, it speaks to what it is, but in a juxtaposition on her on her Author Central page, she says, the author of intoxicating romances. And I was like, bam, that's hot. So that, I think she needs to take that energy to some of her subtitles, could serve her really well, especially the romance genre is super competitive.
Yeah.
But she's got some spicy wording in other places. And I think seeing that peppered in to her subtitles and to some of the first lines of her descriptions and things like that, again, these are tiny details that sometimes really start adding up when it comes to trying to catch the attention of more people when you're looking to expand your potential buyers. And you know what I mean? At that point, every 10 new people that get to your page matters and potentially is more sales. So making little changes like that are free and easy to test and play around with can sometimes make a big impact on new people that are just being introduced to your brand for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I think that's great. And again, I tell you something, Isabel, keep writing, because what you're doing is author of intoxicating romances. You've really got your, and if anybody listening wants to check, now I'm just going to totally put you on the spot, my dear, isabelpeterson.com. Take a look at this website. It's a great example of an author who really has it together. And has got a bunch of, really fun links, and be sure to click on the happy hour. That's my favorite. Boozy recipes. Love it. I want to thank you all so much for listening. This was really fun. Can this book be saved? Send in your requests, please. We'll leave the details for that in the show notes. This is Penny Sansevieri and Amy Cornell, and this is the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. We so appreciate you listening. We hope that you find these shows helpful, and we always welcome your feedback. Bye-bye.